5.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Roseanne. So, welcome everyone to the second iteration of the Postdoctoral Research Faculty Crash Course. My name is Ketan. I am the Postdoctoral and Graduate Student Professional Development Specialist for the Faculty of Engineering and Architectural Science at Toronto Metropolitan University, and I'm joined by my colleague Roseanne Aliang from Baycrest Academy for Research and Education. Roseanne's the Director for Research, Innovation, and Translation for the Center of Aging and Brain Health Innovation. So today we're going to be talking about academic CVs and cover letters. Uh, before before we start, I'll read the land acknowledgement. Uh, so we acknowledge that the land we are meeting on is in the traditional is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. We're grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land today. You may live, work in different territories, in different parts of the world. So we encourage you to reflect on the land on which you are located and to consider your relationship to the land and to the people who are the traditional keepers of the land. So some housekeeping before we begin. Please put any questions you have in the chat. A lot of us, both Roseanne and I, are single screen users, so we may not be able to see the chat until the very end of the session. I would also request you to maybe hold on to your questions until the end because we may cover it towards the latter half of the workshop. So please stay tuned and keep your questions ready. Our goal is to have at least 30 minutes dedicated to Q&A, so we hope to get to all the questions. Please mute your microphone and please feel free to keep your camera on. This session is being recorded, and as Roseanne mentioned, the recording and the slides will be shared through our website. So please make sure you log on there. We hope to have all that uploaded within the next 1 or 2 weeks. Please consider participating in the survey. It will definitely help us tremendously with our programming and with our offerings. And to tell you a little more about that, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Lena Quilty from CAMH.
Thanks so much. So thank you to everyone for joining us. We're really delighted to have you here. So as mentioned, we're conducting a brief, I promise, a brief evaluation. So you're anyone who registered for this session will have received an email from my colleagues, Sam Joel or Nikita, typically titled From Postdoc to Research Faculty Course Survey. So that's the baseline survey, just getting an idea of where you're at in terms of your knowledge and preparedness and readiness for this process. And then at the end of today's session, folks who've completed the baseline will also receive a post-session evaluation survey as well. We do send some nudges, so hopefully those aren't too annoying for you. The fastest way to get rid of the nudges, though, is to do the survey because we don't send them to anyone who's already completed it. But we really appreciate you considering. We've tried to keep it as short as possible, but it's really critical to make sure that these kinds of courses that we're offering are really well mapped to your needs and having the impact that we hope that they have. But that's it for me. If you have any questions about it, don't hesitate. My email is in the email that you'll be receiving. Would be delighted to give you any details that you might be keen to know more about.
Thank you, Lena. So with that, we'll head to the table of contents. So today we're going to be talking about both the academic CV and the cover letter. For each of these types of documents, we're going to be talking about the purpose of the document, the format of the document, the content, and some do's and don'ts. The examples we're discussing today are North American examples for the CV and cover letter. And by and large, that format is similar in other countries as well. In some countries, they may have a specific format, in which case there's usually a template provided, and we will have some examples from other countries linked just for your reference. But keep that in mind, that you need to be paying attention to the specific country you're applying to, where the institution is located, and see if there are differences in the format. But for North America, by and large, the format is pretty similar. So, some considerations: who's the audience that's looking at your CV and cover letter? And usually it is a search committee that consists of faculty members. So, you have to structure and write your content in a way that's appealing to them. And it also speaks to the specific job posting that you're applying to. In your position, what will you be doing? So, most of the faculty positions involve a combination of research, teaching, and service, although the ratio of each of these types of responsibilities and how much you'll be doing them is going to vary based on the role. So it's really critical that you organize your documents and organize the sections in the CV and the content in the cover letter based on the type of role that you're applying to, which could be more teaching heavy or more research heavy. Are you matching relevant skills? So usually when there's a call out or call for these kinds of positions, the research theme or the kinds of requirements that they're looking for in terms of the skills and experience are very well outlined. So you want to make sure that what you're putting into your documents aligns really well with what is being asked. And then finally, what should you be highlighting? So for research intensive positions, research fit and productivity is really important. Listing all your publications, books, any kind of content that would qualify under publications, patents, all of those are really important. Your history of grant funding and successful award funding. Teaching and mentoring, so not just mentioning that you've taught and mentored, but actually talking about how many people you've taught and mentored and the kind of impact you've made with them. Any leadership or service roles, and then finally your unique selling point, and that's something I'll cover a little bit later when we talk about the cover letter. But briefly, what the USP is referring to is something outside of your research and teaching that helps differentiate you from the other people that are applying for these positions. I'll hand it over to you, Roseanne.
So we're going to kick off by starting to discuss the CV, primarily around purpose, formats, and content. Next, please. So here on the top of the slide, we actually refer to the academic CV versus the resume. This is typically how it's referred to in the North American context, but some jurisdictions actually use those terms CV and resume interchangeably. So just to note, we're going to talk about the academic CV as what most individuals will be preparing to apply for a faculty position or a research-based position, and resume being what we're typically submitted if you're applying for a non-academic position, for example, an industry position. What you see here is that on the initial target or screening audience, the academic CV is designed for review by faculty or the search committee, as indicated by Ketan on the previous slide. And then on the industry side or non-academic side, the documents typically designed for review by a recruiter or a hiring manager. The content focus for an academic CV is typically, as Ketan mentioned, really focused on research and or teaching, depending on the position, of course, and then a deep emphasis, excuse me, on grants and awards and publications. Now, on the resume side or industry side, we're really highlighting position-related content and much more emphasis on transferable skills and techniques. That's not to say that they are not valued in an academic position, but perhaps the emphasis looks a little bit different in the documentation. As indicated in the slide, publications and presentations are comprehensive on an academic CV. You will see many individuals with double-digit number pages in their CV, so you are putting everything there. But on a resume, it's selected, if any, and only if it's relevant to the position that's being applied for. Next, please. In an academic CV, references are typically listed, but on an industry or a resume, they're typically not. And they're typically provided or asked following the interview, after the interview process. As I mentioned previously, an academic CV, there is no hard limit. And so you could see CVs in the tens and 20s of pages, depending on the productivity of the individual. Whereas a non-academic or resume is typically 1 to 2 pages max. Now, in terms of the format, an academic CV can be submitted as an email attachment or an online application system, depending on the institution that is hiring. And that's quite similar for an industry or resume system, depending on the actual organization that's hiring. So I'll hand it over back to Ketan for the next section.
Thanks, Roseanne. So, some do's and don'ts when it comes to your CV. Make sure that your formatting is consistent and that you're using white space. Remember that there is no page limit for a CV, so you don't have to cram all your information into one page or 2 pages. The other reason for using white space is you want to make it as easy as possible for people reading your CV to digest all the content. Remember that the search committees that are looking at your CVs, they may be looking at hundreds of these documents. So you want to make it as easy as possible for them to read and understand the information on your CV. You want to make sure that you're using capital letters or your sections are bolded and highlighted appropriately. Consistency with using active voice. So try to use active voice for your bullets. Try to have an impact or result at the end of every sentence. And use concision when you're writing. Don't try to have too many paragraphs. I've seen some CVs where people just put chunks of text for their responsibilities in their roles, and it from a reader's perspective, it's hard to really go through all that text when everything is just a chunk of text. So keep that in mind. And obviously, you want to make sure there are no grammar or spelling mistakes. Some don'ts are that you shouldn't be padding unnecessarily or repeating information just to increase page numbers. More page numbers doesn't necessarily mean that it's a better, CV. So keep that in mind. And this is a formal document, so use formal language and try to avoid slang or colloquialisms. More do's and don'ts. So make sure that you're using bullets, as I mentioned before. Make sure you order the sections based on relevance for the particular role. So if you're applying to a more research intensive role, you want to make sure that any experiences or sections that are more research focused appear further towards the top. If you're applying to a more teaching focused role, you want to make sure that your teaching related experiences and sections are further towards the top. Within each section, make sure that everything is listed in reverse chronological order, so going from most recent to least recent. Make sure that your contact information is on the top of the CV. In some cases, people put both their departmental address as well as their personal address. It's up to you to decide which one you're going to put, but just make sure it's something where you have an active mailbox or where you can check your mail. And you have a phone number as well, in addition to an email that you check regularly. Make sure that you have a list of professional references at the end. And when you list your professional references, make sure you have updated contact information for them as well. Most of the correspondence nowadays is done through email, but it's not a bad idea to also include a phone number and their title and address just in case. One other thing that's important to keep in mind is when you include professional references, make sure you list what their relationship is to you. So that means if they are your PhD supervisor, postdoctoral supervisor, someone on your dissertation committee, make that very clear, because it's good to contextualize that information to your recommendation letters. So that's really important. Don't use acronyms without at least defining them once. Avoid font size smaller than 10.5 because it's usually very hard to read. And if someone's printing out your CV, the font size at least needs to be 10.5 or 11 to be able to be read easily. And avoid using font that is too fancy or illegible, hard to read. Use fonts that are easy to read. So always make sure maybe taking a test print of your CV or cover letter to make sure that both online and in print form it's easy to read, so that you're kind of covering all your bases. In terms of common CV sections, the most common ones, as I mentioned before, are your name and contact info on the top. One thing I've seen very common these days is people immediately put a section on their research interests. That's to show alignment with the job description. So if the job description is calling for a specific field of research or teaching experience, then the summary or that research interest section can capture that immediately, and it gives the reader assurance that you've read the job posting and you are thinking about fit for the particular role. Your work history, dividing your research work by projects if necessary. When it comes to scholarly research creative works, or SRC as it's referred to here, publications, books, patents, anything that would fall within that realm. For people that are maybe in other fields, it could be, or let's say non-biomedical fields or non-STEM fields, liberal arts, humanities, anything that would fall within SRC for you, please make sure you note that down. It could be podcasts, book readings, those kinds of events. Teaching and mentoring, make sure you're using numbers, metrics wherever possible. So don't just list courses you've taught. Talk about the responsibilities, talk about the number of students you've taught. If you were acknowledged for your teaching abilities or you received a really great rating, make sure you mention that as well. Conference presentations, list them again in reverse chronological order. Any funding you received, very important, list the full name of the funding or the award. List dollar amounts. If you're applying internationally, make sure you convert the amount into whatever the local currency is, and vice versa. So if you've received something that's internationally funded and you're applying for something here, just so that it helps build context. And then any service that you've done, treat it like you're talking about your research project. So write full bullets that talk about what you actually did in those roles. So if you're talking about peer review, list the number of publications you've peer reviewed, list the journals you've peer reviewed for, that kind of thing. So always be thorough and accurate, and use metrics, numbers, quantities, dollar amounts wherever possible. Avoid repetition, very important. Again, avoid padding your CV. So I think in terms of CV mistakes, using too many words, having paragraphs too long of in terms of length of your sentences, that's probably something you want to avoid. Don't be super creative with the format. Again, this is a very professional document. They want to see the information front and center, so being too creative might not work in your favor. The emphasis should be on clean formatting and legibility, and should be easy to read. Make sure you use a consistent citation style for everything that needs a citation style. So what I mean is, when you're listing your papers, your conference presentations, your book chapters, whatever the case is, make sure you pick a particular citation style and stick to it. I've seen so many CVs where people change the citation style halfway through their list, and that obviously can be interpreted as, unprofessional, not paying attention to detail. So make sure you do that and stick to a consistent style. For North American CVs, avoid listing personal information like your marital status, date of birth, your gender, photograph, and native country. Your citizenship status may be something that's asked in the application procedure itself, so you don't necessarily need to put it on the CV. However, if you're applying to countries outside of North America, make sure you look at the format for that country to see what the norm is. In some countries, you may be expected to include some of this information.
So we
Um,
wanted to kind of provide a tangible example of how you might think about breaking down a particular activity that you've done. So next, please, Keaton. Okay, so what we've seen, for example, and for those in the audience who might be in the humanities or like a non-psychology field, the idea is to take something that you would normally think about as an achievement. So in this case, explore, and this is a personal one, explored neural mechanisms of body and face perception using MRI. Now, some people might just put that there, but what one exercise we want to encourage everyone to do is to actually think about what goes into doing that kind of particular study or investigation. So, for example, thinking about that you developed and synthesized extensive literature reviews of existing research, developing novel behavioral experiments, assessing, in this case, adolescent perception and preferences for human bodies and faces. What does recruitment look like? So successfully screened and recruited 150 adolescents from, in this case, high schools to participate. Developed two novel fMRI experiments to examine sex differences in regional activation. Now, we're not saying you put everything into your CV, but it's a good exercise for you to look at your activities and break them down so that you can actually begin to articulate what your skills are, how it matches to the job posting, and a fit for the department or organization that you're looking for. Next, please. Likewise, you could also think about, for example, screening other types of population. So if you've worked with a clinical population, youth in this example, that might be something to highlight. Conducting statistical analyses, preparing reports, using a variety of different software. The other thing to think about is also looking at your administrative study duties. So whether or not you were responsible for budgets, finances, reporting to funders, for example. As an example, think about all the different students you've supervised within your laboratories or your teams and quantify them, including staff like research assistants or co-op students or volunteers. Also think about quantifying, coming back to Ketan's point, your outputs. So providing writing or providing editorial support for, in this case, 4 scientific manuscripts, 10 posters, and 5 presentations. You can also differentiate between international presentations versus national versus local as well. And then building on what Ketan also said, supporting national grant applications as well. So what starts off as one line actually is a wealth of experience and expertise that you're developing. And we want everyone to think about how do they reflect on them and articulate them, and then select the best points to include in your academic CV. Next, please. You can take the same approach to your teaching, for example. So in this case, serving as a teaching assistant for 3 terms at the University of Toronto in the psychology and statistics departments, you should think about how many lectures and how many students you delivered to who you instructed. So in this case, 10 lectures to 500 students in the Department of Psychology, evaluating and grading term papers, providing student feedback, explaining core course concepts, answering student questions during dedicated office hours. And for anyone, as Ketan mentioned, who does receive a feedback or evaluation report, and if you've done particularly well, in this case, received a 4.8 out of 5 rating, with 5 being excellent, based on 400 student feedback forms, it's a tangible piece of evidence about your quality as an instructor. And for a teaching position, this could be very demonstrative of your skill and expertise. Next, please. So, same thing around service. So, in this case, serving 2 terms as the treasurer of the University of Toronto Psychology Society, one should think about, next, please. For example, who you were representing. So, in this case, representing 400 graduate psychology students at university council meetings. If you were involved in coordinating or implementing campus-wide events for stakeholders, whether that be students, faculty, community. Were you responsible for an annual budget because essentially new faculty members will have budgets to operate. So were you able in this case to report that you were responsible for $50,000 of annual budget, whether that be reconciling expenses, producing annual finance reports, staying within budget, for example? And were you collaborating with different groups and stakeholders? So, for example, University of Toronto Biomedical Engineering, a different department, maybe community members, maybe industry, for example. So this is where you can start thinking and highlighting those other pieces of your portfolio that you might not think of if you just put I was a treasurer for a University of Toronto society. So again, it's not meant to include everything in your CV, but you can't necessarily pick what's the best fit until you've actually properly reflected what your activities represent. Over to you, Ketan.
Thanks, Roseanne. Those are great examples. So we're going to take a look at an example CV, and I will ask Jordan, who's helping us out from UHN, to please put the link for this research focused CV. The annotations are only for your reference, so you wouldn't in real life you wouldn't be submitting an annotated CV. The annotations are just for your reference. So I'm going to stop sharing just for 1 second and then move to the other screen. Okay.
And while Ketan's doing that, please do keep on putting questions into the chat. I love to see that people are putting questions. We'll address them as we get to the end of the session.
Okay. So, and
And
apologies for the abrupt shifting. I only have one screen, unfortunately, so please bear with me. So when we look at the CV format, the first thing we're seeing on top is the name, the department address of where the person's currently doing their postdoc, and then their home address and their email and phone number. Again, this is not necessary. The personal address isn't necessary, but I think providing a cell phone number is a good idea just in case. And an email, obviously. Your education with your university name, with your thesis title, and your degrees. When you talk about your research experience, mention your title and the university or institution you're at, the department you're in. Make sure you're denoting the years. And when you write the sentences, try to, again, as I mentioned before, use active voice. So if you've initiated collaborations, if the collaborations have led to a publication, you want to make sure you're connecting those pieces so it looks almost like a narrative, and that's how you should structure your bullets. Make sure you tie in productivity and fundability. If a particular work led to an award, make sure you write that. If it led to X number of publications in particular journals, make sure you write that as well. If your work involved undergraduates or students, make sure you write that as well. That's particularly important if you're going to be going to institutions where you're going to be expected to work with undergraduate students and involve them in research projects. When you talk about research funding, make sure you write the full name of the grant or the project, the institution where you received it, the name of the funding body, the dollar amount or the money amount that you received. What was your role? Now, as postdocs and as PhD students, we may have limited opportunities to be the primary and principal investigator. However, if you had a significant part in the writing and development of the grant, in the data analysis, in different aspects of the grant, make sure you really clearly delineate what your role was, and that will give the committee an idea of the level of expertise that you have when it comes to getting grant funding. Any fellowships you've received, again, make sure that you put the full name of the award. If it's an internal award, it doesn't help to add a one-line description because the person reading your CV may not be familiar with the particular award. Now, this is from UCSF, so you'll notice that the spellings of certain words, or of all the words, are US spellings. Make sure that if you're applying to a Canadian university, you use Canadian spelling. So, for example, honors would be spelled Honours. if it was for a Canadian university. Any awards you've received, again, travel awards, poster awards, make sure you write down when you got them and the dollar amount, if there was a dollar amount. For peer-reviewed publications, make sure you bold your name so that it's very clear for the person reading. They're reading so many of these, it just helps to use that kind of convention. And then any submitted manuscripts, manuscripts in preparation, patents, teaching experience, make sure you clearly define what your responsibilities were, the number of people and the number of students you taught. If you did both labs and classes, make sure you write those down, what your responsibilities were. For mentoring, it really helps adding what level you were mentoring them for, the students for. So were you mentoring them for their research projects? Were you their thesis co-mentor? What is their current status? And the reason for adding their current status is to see where, in part, your mentoring may have contributed to someone's career development. So it really helps having that information there as well. Even if let's say your mentoring has helped them develop a poster that helped them get an award, mentioning things like that is really helpful because it shows the effectiveness of your mentoring and how you've contributed to that person's career. In terms of service and outreach, mention individual contributions that you've made. For presentations, follow the same convention that you did for papers. And then this particular CV example doesn't have professional references listed at the end, but make sure you have at least 3 references listed at the end. So I will go back to the slides. Okay, so that was the example CV. Now we're going to look at a not so great example. So Jordan, if you could please drop the link in the chat. So I want you to review this example. I'll give you about, we're at 12:37 now, so I'll give you about 2 minutes, 2 to 3 minutes, and we'll come back to this example to kind of see where we could make more improvements. And then we'll share a more improved version of this document as well. So I'm going to stop sharing just for, oh, you know what? I'll keep the screen on so just to avoid going back and forth. So please look at the document that Jordan's sharing and think about what kinds of things can be done to improve it. And then we'll take a look at it together.
And if people are putting suggestions on how to improve it into the chat, please go ahead. Thank you so much. I like that it's interactive. Thank you.
Okay, we'll give it 1 more minute. Don't worry if you didn't have time to go through the entire thing. This is just a short, short exercise.
There's already about 7 or 8 improvements in the chat for you.
Oh, great. Okay.
Yep. So people are saying add the phone number and email at the top, inconsistent formatting and poor use of subheadings, lack of active voice, lack of many details, quite superficial, no dollar amounts for grants and awards. So lots of good feedback here in the chat.
Okay. I think I don't think I need to go through the.
Yeah.
We have a very perceptive audience. That's wonderful.
Yes.
So
Research experience is very brief for 10 plus
yes.
years use of experience. Break it down for different positions.
Yes.
Yep. So people are, yeah.
Yeah. So great. So what I'll do is You can take a look at the improved example. The improved example is slightly more improved. Jordan, if you'd like to drop it in the chat, please. Um, but in the improved example, we'll take a look at it briefly. So let me see if I can, yeah, I can just do this. So in the improved example, you'll see that there's a profile mentioned so that it kind of aligns with the position. So the person has mentioned what their area of expertise is. You don't necessarily need to have a profile section, but if you don't, I recommend having some sort of a research interest or a similar section that immediately sets up context for the person reading your CV. Uh, you'll see that the years are mentioned, research experience is mentioned, publications are mentioned here, dollar amounts are mentioned, as someone pointed out, for individual grants and awards, conference presentations, teaching experience is mentioned with more context in terms of what the responsibilities were. For mentoring experience, individual students are listed along with the role that you played as their mentor and the contributions you made. Service and outreach, again, what exactly you did in those roles, and then professional references are listed as well. Again, this isn't a perfect CV, it's just a little more improved. And the key here is as you start writing these documents, you will notice that you will have to go through maybe the first draft, the second draft. You keep improving each time. So I'll go back to the slides. And just for your reference, we've included some CV examples for other countries. UK is pretty similar, I would say, to the North American CVs. And then I've included a template for Finland and a template for Japan. Note these are templates that are specific. So the CV template is from a specific Japanese university, and the CV template for Finland is from the Finnish National Board on Research Integrity. So if you are ever doubtful about what format to use, you can always reach out to the contact person on the job ad, or better yet, also see if you can talk to someone that's a newly hired professor there to see if they'd be willing to give you some, advice. The best thing to do is to find if the job posting itself comes with a template, or the university itself comes with a template, because then you can use that for applying. I've spoken to some people that are faculty in the Middle East and in some parts of Asia, and the general consensus is if there is no template given, you can definitely use the North American format and it should be okay. But please do your due diligence. And back to Roseanne for a new CV format that's coming up, the narrative CV.
So some of you may have already seen that the Canadian Institutes for Health Research, or CIHR, is evolving their CV format. So they have piloted and they are moving towards what they call a narrative CV, particularly for grant applications. So some of you may have been exposed to this, but if you haven't, it is a new format that allows researchers to build a narrative highlighting their key research findings, societal impact, and career trajectory. And this comes back to what Ketan was mentioning in terms of wanting to build your story through both your cover letter and your CV. So the three major sections is a personal statement, significant contributions and experience, and then supervisory and mentorship activities with a limit of 5 pages. So at this point, it does mean that you need to do your reflection exercise and then identify what pieces of your CV, your full CV, would you want to build in terms of this narrative CV. And again, I think we would encourage you to look at the job posting, look at what the department is looking for, so that your narrative would align most closely to what the department is looking for, whether it be a research focus, whether it be teaching experience, whether it be your unique selling point. And then, as I said, this may also be a useful tool for you to start thinking about preparing for interview questions. As this is a narrative CV, it would help you actually build a narrative in the context of an interview to make the compelling case for your fit for the position. Back to you. Next slide, please. We're going to move swiftly in the interest of time to the cover letter. Again, purpose, format, and do's and don'ts. Next slide, please. So a cover letter is building a narrative for your job. And in this case, your job application, and it's your opening dialogue. Next, please. We want to make sure that you keep it simple with a 2-page max. Next. That you are keeping the organization and the employer foremost in your mind. Okay. So as you draft this letter, you want to make sure it addresses the needs of the prospective employer, the university, the department, what have you. You want to use the job posting for keywords and phrases. Don't make the employer hunt for fit. Make the argument for fit explicitly. Next. You want to highlight and sell your relevant skills and experiences. Again, make your case for being a great match and fit. Next, please. You want to be original, confident, sincere, and engaging. And remember, you are writing as a prospective peer, not as a student or a postdoc, because you are applying for a faculty position. And next. And again, use professional letter formatting and make sure it is error-free. The same applies with your CV as it does with your cover letter. Next, please. Common cover letter mistakes are putting the name of the wrong university and position. It might sound quite intuitive, but once you've put together a number of different packages, you're applying for a number of different positions, and you always start from a previous version, some people have literally forgotten to update the name and the position, and that is the first thing that a reviewer will potentially see. So please don't make that error. Next. Being too generic, as we already mentioned in the CV, you do want to make sure that your cover letter is specifically tailored for the position that you are applying for, whether that be the department, whether it be the research focus, whether it be the city and the institution that you're applying for. Next, please. Copying and pasting information from the CV directly into your cover letter. Please don't do that. The idea is that your letter is a dialogue and it is an opportunity for a narrative, kind of like your narrative CV, but in a letter format. So please don't just copy and paste directly from your CV because this is your opportunity to weave a story, not duplicate your CV. Next. And then, of course, picking irrelevant points to highlight. If you are applying for a teaching position, but all you highlight are your research experiences and don't mention teaching, then it does not make the case for fit. So again, be very judicious and strategic on what points you identify in your CV to highlight in your cover letter. Next. Some do's and don'ts. Again, use keywords from the job posting. If you are currently in a department or a research organization, you would like to potentially use the department and faculty letterhead in your cover letter. Keep your header formatting consistent. Make sure that you have consistent formatting. You're not changing fonts midway through. Your margins make sense. Again, reference your fit, whether that be location, teaching, research collaborations, what have you, and use the letter as an opportunity to actually communicate evidence of your productivity, whether it be teaching, service, research. Again, like in your CV, please don't use acronyms. Please don't use small font less than 10.5 or 11. Avoid illegible font and avoid going beyond 2 pages. Next. Over to you, Ketan.
Okay. Thanks, Roseanne. So we'll just quickly look at this cover letter also from UCSF. So as mentioned by Roseanne, make sure you're using your university or institution letterhead, and make sure that the header is similar to your CV. Make sure you very clearly denote what posting or what job you're applying for, what your primary goal. So if it's your research, make sure you talk about what your research is focusing on. And so it's basically talking about fit. You want to make sure that you're really setting up a case for why they should hire you. So what is novel about your research? What are the contributions you've made to impact your field? Those are the kinds of things you want to be focusing on. If you're collaborating with people at different institutions, mention that. If you're planning on collaborating with people at your future institution, mention that as well. You want to make sure that everything ties together. So if you're talking about your research, how it led to a particular research direction, publication, grant, you want to make sure you're tying all of that. So again, it reads like a story and not just you copy pasting bullets from your CV. And then what they're really looking for is productivity, a history of productivity and longevity in your field. So think of the cover letter as a future facing document. So you want to make sure you're balancing out it out in terms of what you're also planning to do in the future, and don't just talk about your past achievements. And then in terms of fundability, if you have a plan in terms of what kinds of funding and awards you're going to be applying for at the future institution, make sure you mention that as well. And obviously, service might not be as high up in terms of priority as the research and teaching, but that one service commitment or that one experience that makes you stand out from the rest of the people applying for these roles, make sure you mention that as well. And then mention things at the or facilities or resources at the future institution, so it shows them that you've done your homework. So these are all really, really important points. Try to not go over 2 pages, as we mentioned before. So this is kind of a standard format for a cover letter. I'm going to be showing you some, so this example was from UCSF. You can access it through the slides. Some examples of paragraphs that show novelty and impact. So here's a paragraph that talks about doing wheat research. The researcher is very clear about their contribution to the field, the novelty of their work, if they're using cutting edge technology or a new technology or a novel approach, mentioning that as well, and how they're planning on continuing to do that in the future. So it really forms a thread of how they're planning to use their current work and develop it into a research program in the future. Understanding what the role entails. So this is an example of a paragraph where a person, this is from Dr. Dowell's application. They've mentioned that they developed an understanding of what goes into starting a new lab or new research program through supporting their own mentor, and that they'll be bringing in funding themselves, which obviously makes them a very attractive candidate. So if you have funding that you're bringing in with you, please mention that on the cover letter as well. And then highlighting fit for the department. So this is for a cover letter for a Yale faculty position, and you'll see that Dr. Collin has really highlighted all the different facilities, research facilities that are available that would be helpful for them. This will show the search committee that you've done your homework. So make sure you highlight these useful resources that will be available to you at that institution. And then finally, on a personal level, sometimes people will add what makes the city attractive for them, or the city that they're moving to or they're planning to move to for this position if they're given this position. And I would say this is probably a bigger factor if you're moving to a smaller city or town, because one of the things the search committee might be concerned about is your ability to stay there and enjoy working there. So anything you can say to reassure them is also good to put in the cover letter. Finally, the unique selling point that I had mentioned to you before. This points out to an experience outside of your research and teaching that will differentiate you from the other people that are applying for this position. This is an example from Dr. Travis Lau, and he talks about how he has cultivated platforms for queer and disabled students, how he plans on doing that work at the future institution as well. So I know we're currently going through a difficult political climate, so you might want to be strategic about which particular experience you decide to highlight. But anything that you can show that differentiates you in terms of everyone having, great research productivity, great research and teaching experiences, that kind of experience is also helpful in making your application stronger. Back to you, Roseanne.
So, in the interest of time, and because we have so many questions in
Okay.
the chat, what I might do is just quickly kind of just give a brief overview, but then I'll leave it in the slides, and the recording for people to go through more, explicitly. So, if we just go back to the previous slide for a sec, just give me one sec. This is an example, of a cover letter, responding to an assistant professor position in the behavioral neuroscience at University of Toronto. The first example, just quickly, if you go forward, Kate, yes, is just a bad example and a poor example of a cover letter. And if we go next, a better example of an application of a cover letter here as well. It may not look like it's 2 pages, but it'll fit on 2 pages. So if you'll just advance through, Ketan. I'll leave it for the audience to keep on going to actually just review this in the video and in the slides. The slides will actually be available and the video will be available on our course website, and we'll provide that information to all registrants after today's session. And just know that it might take a week or two for all of that to be posted, but it will be available through our centralized course website. So back over to you, Ketan.
Thanks, Roseanne. I know we had to, in the interest of time, we went a little faster this part, but trust me, all the information's on the slide. And in terms of just summarizing everything, please make sure you tailor your documents for the particular organization you're applying to. Use the language from the job posting strategically. Make sure you've done your research on these organizations. Add metrics wherever possible. Think about your unique selling point. Most importantly, write as a peer, not as a student or as a postdoc. And I've also added a resource here called the Future PI Slack group. This is for biomedical postdocs that are interested in faculty positions. There's hcommons.org for those that are in the liberal arts and humanities. I urge you to find support groups in your specific fields because then you'll be able to get more tailored support and advice as well. So with that, thank you so much for joining us today. We'll be moving on to the Q&A part. And many thanks to Jordan and Lena as well for joining us today. So I'm going to stop sharing for now. You can reach out to Roseanne or myself if you have any questions, and our emails are given here too. So I will stop sharing and we'll move on to the questions.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Again, my thanks to Jordan and Lena as well for joining us and for the rest of the working group across 8 different institutions who are putting on this course. I'm going to jump to the chat. So our first question is, where does a postdoc fellow position, where should it be located in a CV with education or employment? Ketan, I know that you showed an example. If do you want to speak to that?
I would say probably employment because I look at a postdoc as a job if that makes sense. It's not a degree. So I would say postdoctoral fellow should go under employment. Your education should purely be your degrees, so it should be your PhD or bachelor's or master's. That's my perspective.
And that's probably where I put it as well, because
Yeah.
I think education does focus on the degrees that are given as a result of that educational process. Um, Kenny says, teaching and mentoring typically falls in my dossier too. How much overlap should there be between the two? I'll maybe start just and then Ketan jump in. So I differentiate teaching as teaching in terms of classes, so like formal instruction in terms of, a course or what have you. Mentoring is typically on a one-on more individual basis, whether that be like a research assistant, a graduate student, a co-op student in your laboratory. I'll take a pause there, and Ketan, please jump in.
So I would say, like Roseanne mentioned, yes, mentoring is more one-on-one. However, if you have limited teaching experience, I have heard this shared in new faculty panels that mentoring can be put in your teaching dossier. So if you feel like you have limited teaching experience, for example, I went to a medical school for my PhD, so the only populations I could TA were med students and junior graduate students. So I didn't have as much teaching experience. So I would say in instances like that, probably putting mentoring in your teaching dossier is a good idea, but precedence is probably given to more lecture and sort of that kind of style of teaching.
Question from what about conference presentations where you were a co-author? So there was Kevin responded, I have publication section with subsections for lead author, co-author, publications under review, and publications in prep or something like that. Also a non-refereed publications section. Um, I think we're talking conference presentation. Sorry, we're just like in different sections of our talk. So, in terms of conference presentations, I typically in mine, I might not have been the presenting author. So then I do list as if I'm an author on a presentation, but then I actually highlight, kind of coming back to where Keaton spoke, who was the presenting author, and that may or may not have been me. I think that's what the question is referring to, but Keaton, please weigh in.
I think that question and the previous question, I think, are talking about whether a poster or a talk should go under publications or
Ah,
posters.
okay, got it.
So, in certain fields, for example, in engineering, I know that you present a particular publication at a conference and then it's published in that conference booklet.
Proceeding. Yes.
Whereas in biomedical sciences, a conference presentation is technically considered separate from. So this is where I think it's going to be dependent on your field. So I would say follow whatever people are doing in your field and then see how they separate their uh, conference presentations from what is considered a publication. Uh, yeah, so that
And
would
that
be
might,
my interpretation.
yeah, because there's a follow-on question that some presentations, either oral or poster, published a preceding abstract. Should we list the abstract separately from the presentation list for clarity, or should we group together with the presentation to avoid redundancy?
So I wouldn't necessarily start listing abstracts because then your CV will go super duper long. So I think in some applications they may ask you for examples of your work, in which case you have to include one or two manuscripts that are representative of your writing and your work. But I have not seen CV samples where people list abstracts. I think that would make the CV extremely long. So that would be my answer to that question.
For some who might have less publications and less presentations, I have seen, for example, people do include if it's been like if a presentation has been published in a conference proceeding booklet. I have seen it put together, so it's under like conference presentations, but then as part of the conference, they do publish a proceeding booklet or what have you, and they've just listed like the DOI if it's published underneath. But I agree with you on the redundancy piece. You don't want to look like you're padding your CV by putting it in multiple places, but it refers to the same thing, if that makes sense. Okay. Julia asks, is it okay to include quotes from student evaluations in the teaching experience section?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Oh, sorry. Is it okay to include quotes from student evaluations in the teaching experience section?
I would say quotes are probably more appropriate in your dossier
Hmm.
rather than
Your
your
CV.
your CV. Instead of the quote, I would maybe digest that quote and maybe if let's say they said you had an impactful mentoring experience for them or something like that, maybe you can just put that as in your sentence. But I don't know if quotes are the appropriate place. CV is the appropriate place for quotes.
I would concur with that. The other thing you should bear in mind is what information was provided, like under what terms those reports were provided to you, like if, it was de-identified or what have you. And then if it's appropriate to use, whether that might be something that you might want to, if it's particularly spectacular in your cover letter, that would probably be where if you wanted to kind of move in that direction. Next question from Kimber. Would you recommend including positions you've occupied in academic labor unions on your CV, or would that indicate to employers that you could be a problem?
I think what you have to be mindful of is that your service section doesn't overshadow your other sections.
Mhm.
I had this conversation with a student recently who's applying for grant funding. If your service starts looking more substantial than the other sections, I think that's a problem. But I don't necessarily think. Maybe what you can do is preface what kind of work you've done in labor unions, because there are, at least in Canada, we have faculty unions as
Yes,
well.
you do. I was
So
about to say that.
I think if you talk about your leadership responsibilities, I think those are transferable skills to faculty positions. So I personally don't see anything wrong with that, but you might want to be mindful that that section doesn't kind of overshadow everything else.
I would agree. Like, I think there are absolutely transferable skills. There could be budgetary, there could be administrative, there could be, community engagement components of that leadership. I'd also just also maybe understand your context where, which, or like what organization you're applying to, for example. So if there, for example, has been some conflicts on campus or what have you, just being strategic about how you describe that service and focus on the skills and experience and expertise that you've developed. All right. Selma has indicated, does education need to come first? To me, it seems that recent research is more relevant. Ketan, do you want to jump in?
So I've had this discussion with a lot of faculty members. Everyone has a different favorite. I think the idea is the CV is a 3, 4, 5, 6 page document, right? So as long as you don't put education right at the bottom, I think you're okay. So I would say read the job posting carefully and maybe follow the order that they are mentioning in the posting if you really want to be on the safe side. But I don't think education and research are two sections, right? So I don't think it'll be held against you if you put one over the
Yeah.
top. I think people tend to put education first because for faculty positions, having a PhD is a primary requirement, and so if they see that at the very beginning, it's like checking a box for them. So I would say that's the reason why maybe people put education first, but you can definitely put research interests first and then put education if you wanted to be mindful of them knowing about fit and sort of your educational qualifications.
Um, Anna asks, experience dating, how many years back is appropriate to include in a CV? All relevant experience or within 5 years, 10 years? Um, I would say like don't necessarily tell the everything back like to high school. Like high school, probably not. I typically advise focusing on like that those graduate years, probably, unless there's something very unique in your undergrad years, like in terms of if you've like won research awards or you were particularly productive or you even had publications in undergrad. High school, no, I would say, unless you were like a national award winner of something in that realm. Um, if that makes sense. Ketan, your thoughts.
I agree. I don't have
Okay.
much to add there. That's good.
Alexia asks an example of a unique selling point, and I know Ketan, you actually gave an example in the talk. This was earlier in the presentation. Is there anything you want to add to the USP?
So I'll give you another example from a faculty member here that does similar workshops. He mentioned that one of his mentees was a athlete that then decided to go into research. So the sort of the mental dexterity and the skills that you develop as an athlete, how do you apply that to your research and teaching and mentorship? I think that made that particular person really stand out. I'm not saying you need to have a life changing, experience, but think about it could just even be your lived experience. Maybe you're an
Mm.
immigrant and you've learned things about cultural differences or how research is done in country X versus country Y and how you're going to apply that. So all of these can be counted as experiences. It's about how you take what you've learned from those experiences and then apply it to the application, the job application.
Our next question is, does co-applicant and co-author mean the same thing in the context of a grant? My response, at least from the Canadian context, is co-applicant is a very specific term used in tri-council funding, so NSERC, CIHR, and shirk. And there are very particular roles and responsibilities that come with a co-applicant status on a grant. I haven't typically seen co-author on a grant because most grants have very specific roles, like the nominated principal applicant, the co-investigator, co-applicant, knowledge user. Those are very specific. Co-author is typically used in the context of like a manuscript or some kind of a scholarly product. So I would say like co-applicant is much more relevant, at least in the Canadian context, in terms of a grant. Keaton, anything to add there? Okay. For multi-year scholarships and awards, just list the total amount. Um, Keaton, weigh in.
For multi-year funding, I would say if you list the total amount, say this is for a period of 3 or 4 years,
Yes.
or you can say this much per year.
Yeah.
Um, you can also say what the amount is supporting. So, for example, I gotten a really small grant as a postdoc for $5,000, which is not that much, or not even 5,000. I think it's 3,000. But the idea was it was a seed grant to get some preliminary data that you can then use to apply for a larger grant. So I highlighted that I was able to use such a small amount to still kind of generate data, and this is how I used it. So as long as you as long as you contextualize it, I think you're fine.
The next question is, if we don't include the total amount of a scholarship or grant, will it have a significant negative impact on the application? I'm not sure if the context is they don't know the number or it had no dollar value. Um, I think in that instance, like maybe adding some context for what the award is, because if it was for, it had no monetary value, but it actually was for the best poster or, the best whatever, or, research excellence or something like that, that might be some context to add if there was no monetary value associated with it. Keaton, anything to add there?
Sorry, I didn't quite understand that.
I think if they don't have the total amount of a scholarship or a grant, will it
Yeah.
have a negative impact? I'm just unclear whether or not it had no value to begin with, like dollar value, or if they don't have access to that information.
I mean, either case, again, that's one line on your CV. I don't think you should worry too much about it. If you are able to get that information by emailing an administrator or something, great. If it didn't have a dollar amount attached to it, which a lot of awards
Yes.
don't, that's completely fine.
Next question. I think we answered the next one, so let's go to the next one. Okay. I've been told no, no, no. If we have peer-reviewed a manuscript for a journal editor, what details should we list in the CV? The manuscript name, the journal name,
So I typically only list the journal
journal
name
name.
because for confidentiality purposes,
Agreed.
until the manuscript comes out, you cannot give out the title. And
Correct.
you can also, if you gave the title out, the blind process that happens with reviews, you're essentially the
Yes.
blinding's gone there. So I would say just write the journal name, don't write the manuscript name. And you can
Confirm.
use a website like I don't know if it's still free, but I used to use something called Publons, Publons. You can track all the reviews you're doing and store them there.
Um, okay. I'm trying to think there's a at Kevin, but I think that's further down.
Yeah,
Okay.
Kevin's questions further down. I
Okay.
think maybe we'll do Jolene before
Jolene.
Kevin.
I'm trying to think. I'm at Jen Lismore. Um,
Okay. So
would
I
you?
think there is a question about the letterhead. So yeah, please
Yes.
talk to your PI about what the policy is because I see people saying we cannot use the letterhead, we
Yes.
can use the letterhead.
Yes.
If you cannot use the letterhead, please don't use
Don't
the
do that.
letterhead.
Yes.
Yeah.
I would say like if it's worthwhile checking if you can.
Yeah.
So maybe we should qualify what we said by check if you can use your current departmental letterhead, and if you can, we please go ahead. If they say no, we would do not want you to use that letterhead. Of course, please do not go ahead and use that letterhead.
And I
Um,
don't think they will cut points if that's the policy, that's the policy,
yeah,
right? So yeah.
yeah. Jen Lissmore, would you include reasons for delayed research productivity, for example, a maternity leave within an academic CV, or would that be inappropriate or more appropriate to include elsewhere? Um, Selma respond, I would say yes of things like maternity leave or long-term illness. So, my experience has been that some people do include sections around pauses in terms of their career to explain blanks in productivity. So, for example, if you had like a research experience section and there's just like a 5 year period or a 2 year period where it's blank, some people actually do include sort of pauses in a pauses section or something along those lines. You do not, there is no expectation that you are giving out personal health information or, specific details that you're uncomfortable with. I think if you are interested in putting that, it was a parental leave, or if there was, a health related issue, I have seen people put that, and it does give a reviewer context for what looks like a very large gap that is unexplained otherwise. Keton, your thoughts?
For situations like maternity leave and illness,
Yes.
this is a slightly tricky question because I'm of the mindset that if it's a genuinely long gap, which you feel sort of stands out like a sore thumb, you should address it.
Yeah.
And these are legitimate causes. It's not like
Yes.
you just disappeared or something. So you can definitely put that, but I would say only mention one line or
Yeah.
something like that. I don't, I guess, don't make that the focus of your CV. And depending on your research field, people understand that there might have been challenges when it came to getting your reagents in time, getting the research resources that you need in time. So I think this is something you can probably explain in more detail if it comes up in the interview. But I'm of the mindset that you shouldn't volunteer. You can volunteer just the basic sort of
Yeah.
information, but don't go too deep into it. Um, yeah.
The next question is how many percent, how much, I guess, how much percent overlap is acceptable between the keywords in a job description and in my cover letter? Um, I go with the idea that when you look at the job posting, you should identify strategically the keywords. Not like completely like replicate the job posting in your cover letter, but I think you'll see like, research, productivity or teaching experience or leadership or service. Like there's keywords, but I would not replicate your job posting in your cover letter. Um, you know, I don't know that there's a percentage unless you have a percentage, Ketan, but I usually go with the idea of just really being strategic on what are the key messages in your job posting
Yes.
and then only focus on those words.
Yeah.
Don't replicate the whole thing.
So when we say keywords, it's more like key skills and themes. So if they say we're really focused on sustainability, we're really focused on this theme, that's what we mean by keywords. Please don't start overlapping, and this is
Yeah.
true also for industry positions. I've seen a lot of people sell this ATS nonsense online where they say it has to be 70% overlapping in order for you. All of those are myths. I've talked to recruiters, I've talked to people who are working in higher education that do recruiting for these kinds of positions as well. And it's not about a percentage overlap. It's about noting what the key skills or themes are and then ensuring that those are reflected in your CV and cover letter. So don't start focusing on doing sort of a match of words. Think more broadly. If I'm hiring for this position and these are my wants, how would I want to see that reflected in the cover letter and CV? That's what we're going for.
All right. A tougher question from Kevin. What if someone who supervised you early in your career was later removed from their position for inappropriate behavior, and you obviously don't endorse that behavior or want that associated with you, but it also feels like the CV looks weird for clearly leaving someone off of the professional references? And people have commented saying, a similar situation in terms of a publication they had in a journal just before the journal got a lot of international attention in a negative way. Um, Ketan, would you like to kick us off?
So I've had a friend go through a similar situation. Their mentor was actually fired from their position. But my friend was able to find opportunities afterwards. So I think uh, I don't necessarily think you need to bring that up on your CV. I think what you can do is maybe, as long as the publications were not maybe affected. For example, if you had to retract a publication because of this person's behavior or contributions, then I think it's a bigger challenge because your publication count goes down and you can't list them on the CV. Uh, in terms of not putting them in the recommenders, I know plenty of people who've not had the best relationship with their supervisor and they put someone else. So as someone pointed out, as long as one of your reference letters tackles that situation and it's explained by one of your references, I think you're okay. I think people know that academia can be a very difficult environment. Uh, I w- so that would be my advice, and I apologize if I'm not answering your question more directly, but I would say don't, again, like I said for the previous situation, don't make it the focus of your CV or cover letter. As long as everything else lines up, make sure that it is addressed maybe in one of your references, or if they ask you in the interview, you can be transparent and say, this is the situation, this is how, this is what I'm dealing with currently. That would be my advice.
Um, Next up, slides and recording will be posted on the course website. Jordan did put the website into the chat. We will do it at the end of our session as well, just to make sure that people know where to go to find the video and the slides. Um, you do need to register for each instance of the course. So if you are interested in going to the third session in January, you will need to register for that as well. Is there such a thing as listing too many references, or is more references better? Um, okay, I'm trying to gauge whether or not we're talking about listing 100 references or we're listing like five.
Are we talking about like professional
Professional references?
references?
I think
Okay,
so,
okay, okay.
yes. Yes.
Okay.
Um, I'm trying to gauge too many? Like, were we thinking like order of magnitude, Jen
So
Listmore?
I think we have to first realize what the goal of the referees is. The
Yeah.
goal of the referees is to vouch for you and basically say you're a great candidate for this kind of position. You possess all the qualities that the search committee is looking for. I can guarantee you don't have 100 people that know you at the same level and can vouch for you at the same level. If you do, congratulations. You should be giving this presentation. But it's the idea of having 3 to 4 references is because
Yes.
those 3 to 4 people are the ones that know you the best
Yes.
and can write about your contributions,
Yes.
your fit to a large, extent, and in language that is appealing and persuasive and convincing.
Yes.
So that's the goal of the references. So just having 100 doesn't magically make you appear as a, stronger candidate. So I think the normal number is usually 3 to 4.
Yeah. I was going to say the same thing.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, Ernest asked, can you remind us how we can join the Slack? I think that is the Slack you mentioned at the end, Ketan.
I will put a link for it. I'm not part of it because it is exclusively for postdocs, biomedical postdocs. So I'll put the link for it here, and I think you have to hit the join us. There's a join us link there where you email to be added on to the group. So I've put the Slack group in the chat. Please know that it is for biomedical postdocs. So if from that discipline, there is, like I said, hcommons.org if you're in the humanities and liberal arts. And there might be other ones that I'm unaware of that are in other disciplines.
Okay. Thank you so much for that, Ernest. Next, can we share our CVs with you for some advice? I think depends on which institution you're at, because Ketan, maybe you want to talk about TMU.
So if you're at TMU, You can definitely reach out to me. I work with my role is faculty aligned, but what I can do is if you're not with the Faculty of Engineering and Architectural Science, I can make sure that I forward your request to my colleague Dina, who works for the Yates School of Graduate and Postdoctoral Studies, and she can help you with your CV. If you're with any of the other institutions that are part of the GTA RTC group, like Baycrest, like or UHN, you can reach out to the administrator there to see who the contact person is. If you're not from that group, if you're from another university, most universities should have a career center or someone that can help you out. So try all of those sources first. Um, yeah, go ahead, Roseanne. I think that's my answer.
Yeah. And so we talked about the career interruption piece. I think we talked about the education piece. I think this individual, Lena Heng, said if you've already have one or two teaching positions already, and or are many years away from the last time you were a student, should employment history perhaps come first and education move somewhere further back? And then there was some discussion about just meeting the requirements of the position. So just, checking that box off first. I think Keaton, we kind of discussed it could go either way. It's really kind of
It's okay. I think I don't think it makes that big of a difference because they will see PhD next to your name, so they know you have a PhD. I think if you're particularly if you are applying for a more teaching intensive position, it might make sense to do what you mentioned, which is putting their teaching experience on top. But I will say I don't think this is as big of a deal as maybe we're making it out to be.
yeah,
As long as you mention it within the first 2 pages, I think you're safe.
yeah,
I think if your teaching position is taking up the entire page, then maybe it might be good to have the education because the education is only a couple of lines.
yeah.
So
Check. Within the publication section, is it beneficial to have a subsection that might highlight publications with significant impact, or can this kind of information be condensed and included in the profile research interest section? Um, I mean, I have seen CVs where if there's a particularly notable um, uh, publication, that they might have like a one bullet underneath the publication around particular, like, it was award winning or it has a particular citation factor or something along those lines. But I don't know that we annotate every single publication that you have. Ketan?
so I have seen people list if they have a summary section, they say I have 60 plus publications with over 1,000 citations or something like that. You could do that. You could also do that in your cover letter if you want it to be really strategic. Uh, I've seen some CV versions where people put is it the H index um, or the impact factor at the end of each publication. So that's another way of doing it. So I think you have to do it if you want to do it. I would say do it in maybe different versions of a CV and then read it to see where is it the most impactful. Because that's I think the key thing. So showing line after line if you have very high impact publications, I think that's very impactful. But if you only have a couple that are very high impact and the other ones are medium impact, then you might want to be more strategic about maybe not putting in the impact factor. So I think it's really dependent on overall how your CV is looking.
Okay, next up. What about grants you wrote but weren't eligible to be on as a co-applicant? So, obviously, if you're not listed as a co-applicant, I would not say that you were a co-applicant on your CVE because they can easily check with a funding agency whether or not you are listed as a co-applicant. I think there are ways that you can indicate that you have provided support for like grants, whether it be, supporting writing sections in terms of research experience, in that particular way. So I have seen people say that, like, in terms of their research experience, but not listed under grants necessarily, because that's not necessarily, you're not listed as an applicant on it. Keaton, your thoughts?
So in the example that we showed from UCSF, you can take a look at the grant funding section, and you'll see that the person has says I was a co-author, I was an author or something like that, or this is how I contributed. I contributed with the experimental design, with the data analysis, with the writing. So I would say you can ask your supervisor what would be an appropriate term that encompasses all of these contributions, and then put that, but then list your contributions as well.
Yeah. But just be mindful that certain terms are very specific to the funding agency, and you do not want to misrepresent it in that particular way. All right. I'm mindful it's 1:30. Ketan and I did agree ahead of time that we'd be willing to stay for an additional 30 minutes to answer questions, but that is technically the formal end of today's session. So if people need to go, you're welcome to head out. But if you'd like to stay and just continue hearing the Q&A, we're happy to keep on going through the chat. I don't know honestly how far down in the chat we are right now, but we'll keep on going for the next 25 minutes. So thank you all. For those of you who might have to depart, please, thank you for coming. I'm just going to turn it over to Lena to do one more shout out for our survey. Okay, there you go.
Thank you very much. So yes, just a reminder, you should be receiving an email momentarily from either Nikita Jose or Samuel Francis asking you to complete a post-session eval. It is super short, I really promise. And we really, really value your input on this session, and there's opportunity for you to give requests and other things for us to cover in future sessions. So would really, really appreciate you're completing that when you have a moment, if you can, please. We're all researchers here, so you know how precious this data is.
Thank you so much, Lena. Um, Big shout out. Thank you for all the emoji love that is being sent our way. If people do have to depart, please feel free to. A reminder that the video and slides will be available on the course website. It has been listed multiple times in the chat, so please bookmark that and check it out in the next couple of weeks, and things will be posted. Ketan, any words for the people who might need to depart before I go back to the Q&A?
Um, just please try to attend all the other sessions so that you get the whole picture. And academic job search is a very time intensive, effort intensive process. So we wish you all the best and hope that all of this is going to be helpful for you.
Thank you so much. All right, going back to Q&A, do you also say how many papers you have reviewed? I would say yes.
Yes, yes. And you
Yes.
could do it if you've done multiple papers for one journal. Like I had done 11 or something for one journal. I put the name of the journal, and in parentheses I put the number of publications that I did for each one.
Okay. Next question. For trainees, we had a large role in supervising. Should their names and contact info, assuming we asked before and they are okay with it, be included, or just the number of trainees and what position? Sorry,
I
go
think
Kate.
names is okay
Mhm.
because they probably put in their thesis or somewhere that you were part of in their acknowledgement section, in their report, somewhere on their poster that you were. So I think that's okay. You can, if you want, ask them if you're okay with mentioning where they are right now, even though nowadays on LinkedIn that information is probably public, especially if they're working, in industry or something like that. So I think name is okay. Contact information I don't think is necessary because
Yeah.
I don't think you're going to be putting your mentee as one of your recommenders usually. I mean, I haven't heard of anyone do that.
Okay, next step. Would peer mentorship count towards mentorship on a CV? For example, being a mentor to a first or second year student in your faculty as a fourth year PhD student. So I assume you're a fourth year PhD student and you are mentoring maybe a first year PhD student. Um, I think I would say yes, as long as you're clear about the relationship. Like Keaton, you mentioned, providing exactly what you did, who you were mentoring. So as long as you're transparent and you are providing those mentorship supports. Keaton?
Yeah, and talk to you. I would say I agree with that. Talk to your supervisor, clarify exactly how you're framing it on your CV so that all the parties are on the same page. But I would say, yeah, you can definitely. And in some cases, sometimes you don't have undergraduate or high school students. You have peers or junior peers that you're mentoring, which is completely fine.
Next question. If the job is for a position within a a clinically focused department like physiotherapy or medicine, any suggestions on how to demonstrate your clinical work experience as you will be required to teach clinical students? Um, I think if the expectation is that you are going to have clinical work, sorry, clinical responsibilities, then that would be a section in your CV. So in that regard, you would have to articulate that you have clinical experience as part of your role. I think in terms of teaching clinical students, that could also be under like teaching or mentorship as well. So I'm differentiating between clinical work. So, like you have a clinical role, seeing clients or families or what have you. But then under your teaching or mentorship, if you are serving as a preceptor, for example, then yes, absolutely putting that in your teaching session. Mentorship, like in terms of taking on, mentoring students in the placement students or things like that more informally, yes, in the mentorship section as well. Hopefully that answers Rochelle's question. Ketan, anything you would like to add there?
No.
Okay. Stacy asks, should experiences such as being a poster judge or reviewing abstracts or award adjudication committees be listed under volunteer service experience with bullet points to explain your role? Or would this be better in a list under a different section like peer review activities with no bullets? Thoughts, Ketan?
I would say it qualifies as service.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I haven't seen CVs where it's that level of differentiation. Usually, anything that doesn't fall within research and teaching goes under service. Uh, so, yeah, that would be my answer.
Yeah. I was leaning towards service as well.
Yeah.
Jen Lismore asks 3 versus 6 professional references. Um, I'm going to refer back to Ketan's answer about um, the quality of the references that you're going to get from individuals and whether they can speak eloquently, in depth um, about you. Ketan, anything?
Yes.
Okay.
Agreed. Yes.
Mohammed asks, should I list an incomplete degree from the past, such as a master's degree?
I think what you could do is list your experience,
Experiences.
and under the experience, you could list it as graduate researcher, whatever your title was, research associate, research assistant, whatever it was.
Yes.
Uh, I wouldn't necessarily, because you didn't get the degree, so I don't think it makes sense to really say degree and then incomplete.
Yeah, I kind of concur with that. I would say like it isn't an awarded degree under your education, but if you developed valuable skills and experience that you can speak to, then that is your lived experience in your research experience section. What's a good number of publications to be competitive for research intensive
Ooh,
positions?
the $1 million question.
That is the $1 million question, Virginie. Um, I think it's contextual, right? Because, if you have a science or nature paper, that can be quite impressive in terms of like the journal over numbers. Just to be very clear, I never had a nature or science paper in my career. Um, I don't know that there's like I don't know, Kay, like an actual like special digit number. A lot of it's contextualized in terms of what you're publishing, where you're publishing. Um, yeah, the content of it. Ketan, weigh in.
So there are some publications where they review what the current job market looks like, and they talk about what the general average is for certain fields. Depending on what field you are, you can try to look for these publications. I will say approaching it from that particular perspective, the way you framed it, you might want to think about it a little bit more in terms of what are the institutions I'm targeting?
Mm.
What are the number of publications for the people who've gotten recently hired there?
Mm.
I would look at it from that angle, and not just the number of publications, but what were their topics. Because I'll give you an example. A friend of mine graduated with one publication from a business program, PhD. He immediately got a faculty position because
Yes.
his PhD was from UPenn. Because in that field, your your university name also plays a really important role in addition to the work you're doing. And in that field, publications naturally take longer time. Now, in biomedical sciences, I had 3 or 4 publications in my PhD, but that's not enough to be competitive for a faculty position, right? So it is also dependent on your field too. And within your field, what's your subspecialty? So you could be doing bioinformatics where the metrics slightly different. You could be doing clinical studies in human beings where the metrics slightly different. You could be doing mouse and cell culture studies where the metrics slightly different. So we there is no good answer for this question other than look at the faculty that are being hired right now at the institutions you're interested in and see how your profile compares to them.
All right. Next up, um, hold on. I always review papers on behalf of the PI. Can I include those? I assume on the CV, maybe.
Yes. So
Yes.
I think that's a question for your PI because then they will have to acknowledge that in the letters,
Mhm.
assuming you're picking them as one of your references. So that's a question for your PI. I know I that is how I started reviewing papers is I started doing them alongside my PI, and then eventually I was able to, because I did a few, I was able to get independent reviews. So I think I would talk to your supervisor because they have to be on board with you including it, and then maybe saying co-reviewed or something like that, but it's up to your supervisor.
Next question. Carrie asks, are non-academic roles such as volunteering in the community or coaching a youth sport as a grad student be valuable? I would say personally, yes. And Kay's nodding. I think it's more about, the skills and competencies and experience. So, for example, community, a lot of research, I can speak in my area because I do geriatric research. A lot of it is around community engagement, engaging with, the public. And so any experiences that you have that demonstrates that you're already doing it would be perceived as valuable, as well as like youth sport, the mentoring, coaching, that is inherent in teaching as well as peer mentorship as well. So I think it also speaks to your ability to mentor, granted, maybe in soccer or baseball and not necessarily in lab, but those same coaching skills, mentorship skills, support skills, I think would apply as well. Ketan, would you like to add anything there?
I agree, and I think if you can, like I mentioned before, maybe talk a little bit about what you've learned from those experiences and how you're applying that to your
Yes.
research, teaching, and mentoring. I think it's helpful. On your CV, it's probably one line, but in your cover letter, it can be 2 or 3 lines where you talk a little more about that part.
And depending on the extent of what's happening, that could be a unique selling point, right? Like, I know, for example, like, in the geriatric research, if, you have spent many years, for example, working with the Alzheimer's Society of Canada, and you're looking for, a faculty position in aging research or older adult research, that would be absolutely beneficial and a unique selling point that you've spent many years in service with one of the largest, advocacy groups in that area across Canada. So I think there are ways, as you said, like Ketan said, to make sure you can make that linkage between that community service with how it enhances you as a potential candidate for the faculty position. Ketan? Okay. Dina asks, can I ask what is the difference between professor and visiting professor positions? Can we apply for that position as well? Ketan, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. So the term professor is just the term. So what you have to do is look at it in the context of the job posting. Visiting professors usually are hired for a short term, and the responsibilities are outlined typically because they need to fill a gap in their department. Maybe there's someone on leave, or they have a very specific need for someone to come in, teach a course, do some research, whatever the case is. You can definitely apply for visiting professor positions, but the caveat is those are not permanent, positions. However, I do know people who got visiting assistant professor
Oh,
positions.
she meant postdoc can start as a visiting professor as a start to get more teaching experience.
Yes, you
Yeah.
can, but I guess you are asking the question asks what's the difference between the two, right? So I was
Mhm.
trying to emphasize that the difference is one's are temporary. Visiting, as the term suggests, you're only there for a couple of months. And what I was saying is, I know people who have gotten the visiting experience and made their CV stronger and made themselves more competitive for faculty positions. But what you maybe want to talk to a senior professor or someone that has done a visiting professorship to figure out how did they sell that experience on their CV? Was it really helpful for them? Because it's basically, you're uprooting yourself for a couple of months going to a brand new place, and there may not be a guarantee that it converts into something more permanent, so you have to be mindful of that.
Okay. Those, I believe, are all the questions in the chat. If there are other questions, Ketan and I are happy to stay for another 10 minutes or so that, yep, Dina, come, you raised your hand.
Just to make it kind of quick, if I have kind of 4 years, like four postdoc experience, can I jump from postdoc to associate professor, or it should be like assistant professor first and then kind of, promoted to associate professor? Like if I have a long time of being a postdoc, can I apply for associate professor, or the CV will not gonna kind of, recruit it or something?
I mean, my experience is typically the first entry is an assistant professorship, and then it's moved through promotion. It's not unheard of that individuals entering an assistant professorship do have multiple postdoctoral fellowships. And in fact, some assistant professor positions are asking these days for up to three postdoc experiences. So it's not unheard of to have people with many postdocs, but still going for an assistant professorship. Ketan, what are your thoughts?
I agree. I have not heard of anyone directly getting into an associate professor position because they've had longer, especially in the biomedical sciences. It's not uncommon to have, 7 to 8 years of postdoc experience. It's a lot, but I my postdocs were actually longer than my PhD. Um, but there might be some positions called open rank that you might have seen where they say assistant slash associate slash full professor or assistant slash associate. What that means is you might be competing with people that are already assistant professors that are applying for this, assuming they think that they will get the associate professor title. So if I were think about it from the hiring committee's perspective, on the CV, even though you have so much experience, your title has been postdoc, postdoc, maybe senior postdoc, whatever the case is. And then now you're competing with someone that already has an assistant professor title. You're both competing for associate professor. More than likely, the person with the assistant professor title will be considered because of seniority in rank, right? So I have not heard of uh, someone directly going to associate professor. This is something you should talk to maybe someone that's more senior in your field, like a professor in your field, to see if that's common in your field.
I mean, I'm still have to write in my cover letter that I'm targeting assistant professor, even if I'm kind of, if I'm having 3, 4 years of postdocs, I'm not too late. I'm still targeting
Yes. I mean,
assistant
you
professor.
have to write you're applying to whatever the position
Yeah, yeah.
calls
Okay.
for. Yeah.
No, I mean, if it's open ranked, I'm still writing assistant professor.
If it's open rank, I would probably put the job title the way it is expressed in the job posting
Mhm.
and then see. I've heard that for open rank, you have to really weigh your pros and cons because the competition level will be even higher than just the competition level you're getting for assistant professor positions. So that's a good point. I would just put the job ID and say this position. I maybe wouldn't specify, but I'm not 100% sure on that. I
Mhm.
would maybe
Thank
talk to a
you. Yeah.
professor about it.
Thanks a lot. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Next question. Does age matter at the point of applying to assistant professorship, particularly for women who had family duties causing career interruption? Um, Coming back to what we said about the CV, you are not putting your age or date of birth on those on your application. So, particularly for the North American context, just to be very clear. So at that point, they wouldn't know your age necessarily in terms of, date of birth or what have you. Um, I think it's really about your experience and your expertise as it relates to your CV and cover letter. I don't know, Ketan, if you'd like to add to that.
No, I agree. I don't think it should matter, and quite frankly, I would be very suspicious of an institution that uh,
Had that matter.
does had that matter because if you've addressed it in your CV, you've shown that you've been productive,
Mhm.
otherwise, I don't think it should matter. But, I'm speaking obviously from my perspective.
Agreed.
Uh, and I would be very concerned if a job posting says we're only hiring people age 30 and under or 35 and under. That's crazy.
Mhm.
Yeah.
All right. Other questions for us. Last 4 minutes, I would say, in the workshop. I think, and if I didn't address anybody's question because we scrolled through, please feel free to just repeat the question in the chat, and we're happy to get to that. But I think I've, yes, I think we've gone through. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. We'll still be here for 3 minutes, if people um, have anything pop up, but you're welcome to leave. I think this is the formal end of our Q&A. But thank you, everybody, so much for joining us and for all of these very valuable questions. As a reminder, slides and video will be available on the course website in the next couple of weeks. Oh, another question came in. Monica asks, how would you handle if the question of your family circumstances comes up in the interview, for example, having multiple maternity leaves? How would you disclose that without being rude, but also protective of your life choices? Um, okay. I think I'm going to start and then maybe Kaitan, if you want to jump in. I think one, I always emphasize that your privacy and psychological safety is paramount in any interview. And I would never advise, again, this I'm speaking for myself, that you are quote unquote forced to disclose anything that you don't feel comfortable disclosing. So if there's something that, you don't want to disclose, I mean, I would advise people say like, thank you for the inquiry. I feel comfortable sharing this with you, but that's the extent to which I feel, comfortable disclosing that. And coming back to Keaton's point, any organization, for example, that pushes you into an unsafe space, I feel like might not be the best fit for you in terms of what that department or that organization. Um, I think you would want to make, some personal reflection to start about like what you feel comfortable disclosing before going into any interview, and then staying authentic and true to that. And there are ways for you to say like, this is what I'm prepared to share, and I thank you for the question, and then leave it at that. I don't know, Keitana, what are your thoughts in terms
I
of?
don't have anything to add to that. I agree with Roseanne. I think, um, correct me if I'm wrong, maternity leaves are typically, are they up to a year?
It can go up to 18 months
18
depending on
months? Okay.
how different families have decided to use the leave.
Okay. So I think if this question is referring to how you would put it on the CV, I would say I would just be transparent and say on maternity leave. And there's a person on LinkedIn called Sam Struan that I recommend you follow. He's an industry recruiter, but he does really good posts on how to address gaps in employment, or circumstances that have maybe caused you to have to temporarily leave your employment. I think as long as that's clear, I again, as Roseanne said, these are our opinions.
Yeah.
Obviously, we're not on the hiring side ourselves, but or at least for faculty positions.
Yes.
So, I think people should realize it's a natural part of life, and they should not discriminate against you because of that. So I would say that's fine. The same topic comes up, I've seen, when people might be pregnant and they're going through the interview process, because then they know that they may have to take maternity leave later. And I know that's also a very difficult topic. But I would say I would concur with whatever Roseanne said, and I would say maybe talking to a professor who has gone through
Mhm.
maternity leave might be good to ask how they handled, that those kinds of situations or challenges. Would be a good idea, because I don't feel like I'm the right person to talk about this.
Okay. Thank you, Monica. We are at time. I'm just gonna put, I think, our my email address back in because it was on our last slide. So if people do have additional questions, people are welcome to reach out. And with that, maybe what we'll do is just say our final thank yous. Thank you again to Jordan and to Lena for their support. Thank you to the rest of the working group who we're going to see in about 4 minutes, for their support as well. And just thank you for joining us. And please, a reminder, the next course installment will be occurring in January. So please keep an eye out for advertisements or check out the course website. It'll have more information about registration and dates and times. All right, everybody. Thank you all so much, and thank you for the emoji love. And hopefully we'll see you at another session of the course. Thank you, everybody.